Ariel Hickson in South Orange, New Jersey. Ariel is our expert on all things millennial, pop culture, social media, even politics for Quick Hits News. Ariel, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good, excited to see what is cooked up during this convention.
Yeah, Melania speaks tonight, and we're going to be talking all about that. But Ariel, I want to speak about something that has happened the last couple of days, and that is in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee. Jacob Blake, 29 years old, he was shot at least 7 times in the back in front of his kids. It has sparked now 2 nights of rioting and looting. Incredible reaction. First of all, what was your reaction when you first heard about this story?
Well, I think initially my reaction was, man, another shooting. I think at this point it's still alarming every single time that another life is lost in these circumstances. And what was even more alarming was the fact that just how brutal that this situation was, especially on camera, with how this young man was right in front of his own children and shot in the back 7 times. It's a very graphic video that we have seen time and time again, and it's almost interesting to think about, and shocking and dark to think about how many times this has not been captured on camera. So what went through my mind initially was, when does this stop? But of course, right now, there is really no end in sight, which is the frightening part. But hopefully we can just come to terms with this and get better and better with making sure that more lives are not lost.
Yeah, hopefully it does end at some point. But in the meantime, you're doing some terrific reporting on today's edition of Quick Hits News, which, by the way, if anybody wants to see it, go to our YouTube page, Quick Hits News, or Quick Hits TV, and subscribe, and you can get Ariel Hickson delivered every day in your inbox. Ariel, you were pointing out some terrific reporting in terms of how this played on social media over the last 24 hours.
Yes, absolutely. So I think with social media, with any instance like this, the video especially tends to get circulated. And what I saw specifically from just not only millennials, but everyone who is really putting this video out over and over again, time and time again, we're just kind of morbidly saying, hey, at least he's alive this time, which is kind of the dark thought process of this. Is, okay, we're happy that he's alive this time versus that it happened at all. Like that kind of signifies just how much of an issue this is. And also what I have seen time and time again is that the person who actually caught this video on camera has been traumatized. I think just being a witness to all of this can just have a certain significance as well that no one really taps into. So I think just the prominence that this has in social media, and just having this video, the visuals of it, is just some type of psychological circumstance that we have not really been able to really discuss at length. And I think that's really one of the significant parts of this, other than the biggest issue of police brutality and trying to figure out a way to make it better.
Reaction across the board, at least in the mainstream, has been, everything from Joe Biden saying the police need to be held accountable. There have been efforts by the Wisconsin governor to start an investigation. And then there's been some pushback by the police union, which represents the officers who were involved in the shooting, who said that the video doesn't tell the entire story. And there have been some allegations in the media that perhaps Jacob Blake was holding some sort of knife, although there's been no indication, no evidence that in fact he was. The pushback to the video, what do you make of that?
Well, I think there is some truth to that. You don't really know the full story until you can get, I guess, every single perspective from that. I think the video alone tells a very shocking story, just from face value. But I think, there is a thought process that we still have more details to uncover through this. We need to figure out all the details, just like with the George Floyd issue. We find out more details even now as to what exactly happened. It doesn't make anything better. It doesn't make what happened right. But until we can have the full picture, we can't really make too many judgments. But from what we can see, from what the world can see, it's a lot.
Yeah, I also wonder if there's maybe something generational here, because one thing that I've seen over and over, people from my generation, I guess, not so surprised because this has been happening so long, but I think people of the younger generation, they're like, well, wait a second, when is it ever, even if he did have a knife, so what? When is it appropriate to shoot somebody 7 times in the back in front of their children? He wasn't posing, it didn't look like he was posing an immediate threat. And so I wonder if there's something about how younger people look at this perhaps a bit differently than older folks.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent perspective. I think with younger folks, it's just shocking in general. I think with the older generation, there's a thought process that this has been happening for years and years and years, so just be careful. But when you see the visuals of it, especially from a younger perspective, and you don't see a reason why, it's horrific. It's scary. I think that's what the younger generation is seeing here. It's kind of like, okay, when does it stop? And I think what I've also seen on social media is a lot of parallels, well, to almost every single case. But one of the big issues that has been talked about over and over again is Breonna Taylor, because she was completely innocent in that situation. Lots of parallels to that, even though we don't know exactly what were the circumstances as to why he was shot. Doesn't look like he should have been shot in that case. Why is that the first step to make sure that a situation is resolved to shoot someone? Doesn't make any sense. So I think with the younger generations, it's just flat out alarming, and that's what you're seeing from that.
I want to ask you a little bit about, and tie this in with your expertise on politics and millennials. How does this sort of issue, in your estimation, and there's so much noise out there, right, in the political world. There's the Republican convention, the Democrats just had their convention, there are fires in California, 600,000 people have had to evacuate Texas and Louisiana because Hurricane Laura is turning into a Category 3. How does this sort of story, in your estimation, sort of fit in, and how does it shape the way people are looking at politics right now, at least in terms of younger voters?
Well, I feel like many younger voters are hopeless, but they want to have their voices heard. I think when there's so many issues that are happening across the country, and it doesn't seem like any of them are getting resolved, or there's no steps to them being resolved, especially with leadership, there's a sense of, okay, what are we going to do, and who can we choose to make sure that this happens? That's why I do understand that with current polls and with current research, there is a large percentage of young people who skew to the left side right now, because there tends to be more movement with resolving all of those issues, at least initially, at least what seems like on paper. But I think there is a lack of hope, which is interesting compared to 8 years ago, with when President Obama was running, and it was his whole message was hope, 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 and that's how he got that younger generation. Everyone was so excited to see a change there, compared to the other competitor who was kind of touting, old policies, and this is what we're going to do. This is what we typically do. People want to see change, and if they can't see that, especially with the younger generation, they're not going to have any faith and whoever is the leadership there. And that's why there is some type of reservation as well with Joe Biden, but there's more hope there than with the current president that we have now.
We're talking on HAPS TV with Ariel Hickson from Quick Hits News. She's part of our ensemble every day. We publish our show about 5 o'clock or so. It's a roundtable, 15 to 18 minutes long, top U.S. stories, top international stories. We go roundtable with everybody contributing a story that they focused on and also reacting to other big news. And if you want to be part of this particular conversation, you can join us on Twitter or through Facebook or LinkedIn. Brett Walker actually has a point that he wants to make, Ariel, that he says, I think smartphones documenting these killings in Wisconsin have really changed the game, countering police statements. Has technology, in your estimation, really made that big a difference? And perhaps is that one thing that maybe the younger generation now comes to expect, because they're armed with things that older folks have not had?
Absolutely. I think although in the past we have read and heard from numerous accounts that this has been happening over and over again, to see it visual and to have the tool of a cell phone to document it is huge. Even if there's been certain circumstances where people have been shot and killed where they saw a cell phone. So not necessarily, it's not preventative, but it does show the world what's happening. There's a song by Childish Gambino called "This Is America," and there's a line where he says, "This is silly. This is a tool." I think that pretty much outlines everything. When there are witnesses who are watching certain things happen, they feel like they can somehow contribute to making sure things are right by capturing things on video. And I think also on social media, there's so many different accounts that are just there to show what is happening. Like there's an account on social media, I forgot the exact name, but it's about Karens or something, which we can go into later, but it pretty much shows all of these accounts of racial issues or racial discrimination on camera, because people are using their phones, getting video of it, and then sending it in. So there's this idea that the world is constantly watching, which I think young people are very much tapped into.
And Ariel, you brought us a story actually in Quick Hits a couple weeks ago. I believe it was involving Apple, and it's some sort of app where if you're driving a car and a police officer suddenly pulls you over, there's something you can say to your phone that will essentially enable your phone to shut everything off except the video and the microphone.
Yes, that is correct. I need to get the exact lingo, but I think it was something along the lines of, "Hey, I'm getting pulled over," and then you with the app, it just stops what you're doing. It starts turning on its video. It shoots everything, and then it sends it to one of your dear friends that you have already marked for that video. So I think just that. Well, it's interesting. The fact that that technology exists is slightly disturbing that there had to be this technology created at this point, but the fact that it exists also just shows the power of it. The power of technology today can change and possibly save lives or, in fact, create justice for those who have been in certain situations that are just alarming.
Ariel, I want to, and by the way, for everybody who's just joining us, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, we're talking to Ariel Hickson from Quick Hits News, and we're using HAPS TV technology to talk live. And Ariel is our specialist in all things pop culture, millennial. We asked her to cover technology and politics. And Ariel, I want to ask you a little bit about sort of the way that younger folks are sort of getting their news, because here we are in the middle of the Republican convention. Last week was the Democratic convention. The broadcast networks, they're doing their sort of cable coverage and their evening newscasts and whatnot. But most people, I would guess, 30 years and older and younger, they don't watch cable or broadcast news. They're getting everything over their device. How does that change in terms of the way information is received for that particular generation?
Well, I think with this generation, it's all about the clips. It's all about what is the most interesting moment and or I don't want to say the most TikTokable moment or social media friendly moment that you can send over, but it's all about certain clips that will resonate with the world being shared over and over again. Most people, I would say, who are in that younger time frame or that thought process tend to either scroll on social media in the morning, they read articles, and what they see is what is replicated over and over again. For example, if Melania Trump says something that's really interesting, whether it is positive or negative, that clip will be played over and over again on social media and will be shared over and over again. There's not that many people who are going to be sitting down tonight and watching the RNC and just chilling back with some popcorn with all their friends and making a watch party of it, like the Oscars. I wish it because I'm a little bit of a nerd that way, but that's not going to happen. So I think what's going to happen is all about the clips, all about what was the most interesting sayings or interesting points, or even the funniest moments will definitely be reported over and over again.
Now, I have a technical question for you, Ariel, and this gets to, sometimes the challenge for us at Quick Hits News and HAPS TV. So people who look at Quick Hits News know that we broadcast essentially in a horizontal, a traditional sort of 4x6 television box. HAPS, because of all the people who are watching on an iPhone, they do it vertical. Does that difference matter? Does it matter whether a clip is seen vertically or horizontally, or is it just, are people just sort of used to both?
That's a great question. I think if the clip is interesting enough, it doesn't matter. If the clip is going to grab your attention, you don't care what way it's facing, you just want to watch it. But I think that it depends. I think that usually vertical situations like this are easier to kind of scroll on and watch. When it's horizontal, it's better quality. But at the end of the day, it's like, oh, I have to turn it. I have to turn my lock off. I think anyone who uses technology is a little bit lazy, myself included. So it's like, I don't want to have to do all of this. So yeah, I think it just depends on how compelling the clip is at the end of the day.
And so then to circle back then, you said compelling. When we talk about then, for example, how we started this conversation, talking about what happened to Jacob Blake in Wisconsin, I suppose in that particular case, it doesn't really matter whether it was shot horizontal or vertical, whether it was necessarily a very clear video or grainy or shot from a distance. But there you have an image that is so gripping and terrifying in many ways that's simply going to go viral and get shared regardless.
Yes, I think from my own perspective, just in general, how I actually found this story as a millennial was scrolling on social media. I saw that one of my reporter friends posted the video actually on their feed, and it said sensitive content blurred. So of course that catches my attention. I click on it and then I see it looks like some type of arrest happening with a black man. So I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to have to watch this and see what's happening. That's what goes through my head. And I think that's what it goes through anyone's head who's going through and scrolling through those moments. But it was vertical. It was dark. It was something that, you don't want to see, but you have to see it. And it's very much timely and in our faces right now. So you almost can't ignore it no matter what is shown. You have to check in and know what's going on in the world today so that you're as relevant as possible. I think what's interesting with this generation is that it's cool to know what's happening in the news. If you don't know what's happening in the news, not many people respect you. Unlike back in the day where it's kind of like, oh, news, whatever. No, 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 no. You need to be up on it because these are what the change makers do.
So interesting. I got to ask also, you mentioned that, younger voters, younger consumers of news, it's all about sort of the clips, the small clips. Are there particular clips or particular storylines in your estimation that tend to sort of break through a little bit easier than, let's suppose, suppose Melania Trump says something really remarkable about her husband tonight. That's a certain kind of clip. But there are other kinds of storylines in your estimation that tend to sort of have a better chance at going viral.
That's a great question. I really think it just depends on what message is being communicated with that story. I think if it's something for now, I think if it's something new with COVID, that tends to get a lot of traction because all our lives is depending on what this new research is coming out with. I think if it's something political or something with President Trump, that will be interesting, but to a certain extent, because with this current administration, there's always something new that's happening, so it might not catch your attention as much. I have seen well, interestingly, with climate change, there has been a lot of traction there. And of course, right now, one of the biggest topics right now is Black Lives Matter, is protest, is police brutality. Strangely, which I hate to say, but it's correct. It's a hot topic. It's something that's very in right now. I think what millennials and young people are doing are really using their voice on social media about that particular topic. And what you see are people who have been shy to use their voice before are starting to come out and say certain things about that topic. I'm not sure if it's necessarily because the videos are so blatant and dark and disturbing that people are actually shaken to their core where they have to say something, or in some instances, it could just be because everyone's doing it. But whatever the case is, what I'm seeing is a social movement around Black Lives Matter with people who used to never even participate before.
We heard from Andy Rosen earlier today, one of our correspondents on Quick Hits News, and he reported from Kenosha, Wisconsin, and covered the aftermath of the second day of rioting last night. And he interviewed a business owner and said, look, why do they have to come in and destroy my computer business? And you had an African-American said it doesn't make any sense for the people to hijack this movement and inflict violence because that can cause more harm than good. I wonder if you can get in a little bit to that tension between, obviously, people are so frustrated and so angry when the police will do something like this. And yet there's that line, it seems, where there are people trying to sort of hold the line and make it a peaceful protest. And then there are people who say, look, I don't want violence, but I can also understand the rage.
Yes, and that interview was fascinating with Andy Rosen. I think at the end of the day, what's unfortunate is you can't control anyone, and everyone's human, and they have their own thought processes through this, and some of that is reticent anger, and it comes across a certain type of way, and some people are just frustrated, but yet there's so many peaceful protesters. So what's unfortunate is that sometimes the violence is what's taking what's taking the forefront to all of the peaceful protests and the change. And what's more unfortunate is when all people see is potential looting or potential violence that's happening when it should be all about focusing on the protest. So I think it's unfortunate for people whose businesses are being harmed during this time, especially innocent people who are just trying to carry on a business during COVID-19. It's disturbing, but at the end of the day, that anger that's coming out is through decades, if not centuries, of just being frustrated with the way that this country has worked for a subset of people. So I think at this point, it's all about just making change happen. I think if change happens and there's still violence, that's a good question. That's when it's like, whoa, okay, why is there still violence happening? If change happens and the violence goes down, then you see your change, you see the reasons as to why.
Ariel, I've got a great question for both of us. And by the way, for everybody who's just joining us, you're watching HAPS TV. This is Quick Hits News, a special edition of Quick Hits News. We publish every day at 5 o'clock, a tape recorded show tape recorded, a video recorded show with 5 or 6 journalists going round robin in terms of the top U.S. stories, top international stories. You can find us at quickHitsNews.com, on YouTube, Quick Hits TV. But Pablo asked Ariel, defenders of the police often pull up previous crime reports of the shooting victims. As journalists, how do you handle that information? I'll let you take that one first.
That is a great question, Pablo. Thank you for that. I think, it's difficult. I think as a reporter, I tend to just focus on what happened during that time. If they had previous criminal violations, I use my judgment. If it's relevant to what happened, yes, you must report it. I think, at the end of the day, all information is relevant, but you can't let someone's criminal past overshadow the fact that the person was shot and killed in a way that they may have not needed to be shot and killed. It shouldn't, certain information shouldn't overshadow the rest of the information. So you have to use the judgment as to what is appropriate at that time to report. I think the first couple of days, when there's just a shooting, that's what you have to focus on. But if more information comes out that's relevant, yes, you have to report that as well. It all depends on what's appropriate.
It's a great answer. I would say my answer to this in terms of, as a journalist, using information about previous crime reports, I think it's important that all information get out there, but there's a sequencing. And a lot of journalists, we sort of refer to sort of the pyramid. There's the most important information, and then there's information below. Yes. If you look at a story, for example, I think the Associated Press tonight, they mentioned perhaps in the 12th or 13th paragraph of their story about the shooting of Jacob Blake, that I guess he either had a previous charge for sexual assault or an investigation, something along those lines, and perhaps an outstanding warrant, although the case had not been sort of resolved. But again, that wasn't the lead. And they put it out there, but they put it, I think, far below. And if you just read the top of the story, you get all this sort of information about he was shot 7 times or maybe 8 times, he's paralyzed and waist down. I mean, I think there's sort of a scenario in terms of where the information fits. And I guess in some sense it depends on, how much time you have. But I agree with Ariel. You use your judgment. And sometimes there's even a danger about getting into somebody's criminal background, because if that's just an allegation that was never proven, then you're essentially saying, well, this victim somehow deserved it. And it's a very sort of a dangerous area we get to. Again, for everybody who wants to join us as part of the conversation, we're on HAPS TV chatting with Ariel Hickson from Quick Hits News. Ariel, I want to get into something else that you've been covering for Quick Hits News, and that is COVID-19. And you've been very big in terms of covering the efforts to try to find some sort of treatment and also some sort of vaccine. Given the number of human trials that are out there, and there's something like 20 to 25 different vaccines that are being tested at this point?
Yes, 25 different human trials across the world right now, which is hopeful. Hopefully something good will come from it. But let's suppose that one of these human trials produces great information, and all of a sudden, there's a dose, there's a vaccine that's somehow been approved by the Food and Drug Administration. How does that impact, in your estimation, voters heading into this election, and particularly, the millennials, the people who have been, are at college, who are looking for some sort of antidote so that they can resume their lives? Does it have a huge impact, in your estimation, on where they go politically, or is it just something that people are expecting, and eventually we're going to get a vaccine and just hope it comes? I think it's the latter. I think most people are just expecting, hey, at this point, hopefully a vaccine comes by 2021, and how will that vaccine be rolled out? I think the timing at which it comes out will not necessarily affect who people will vote for. It's more so who's going to be, having more of a message of ensuring that those vaccines will come out and what they will do with those vaccines later. The timing at which it comes out is almost, I don't want to say not necessarily related to who they're going to vote for, but I think it's just a separate entity. Sometimes I think many young voters think of COVID. Well, I'll put it this way: the prevention of COVID they associate with leadership and with President Trump and how it was taken, and the way that COVID will be handled in the future they associate with President Trump as well as potentially Joe Biden. But a vaccine, I think that's just something that's going to happen regardless. So it's not necessarily going to determine who you vote for, unless, hey, what if one of them comes up with a vaccine themselves? That'd be interesting. But doubt they're not doctors, so that's not going
Now,
to
there's
happen.
some
If that
poll that I
did,
just saw that said something like 1 out of 3 Americans, or maybe it's 1 out of 3 American families would probably not take the vaccine because they think that vaccines could cause more harm than good, or cause damage, particularly since this one has been rushed. Do you know if that
yeah.
if that applies generationally? In other words, is your generation more skeptical of medicine and vaccine, or perhaps more supportive of it?
I think, that is a great question. I think it depends on the person. I think what I have talked to with many of my colleagues, they tend to be a little bit skeptical of this vaccine because it's been pushed out so fast. But at the end of the day, it's like we need something. We need something at this point to make sure that this goes down. So I think people who may have been a little bit cautious about vaccines might be more likely to try it out at some point. But what I don't see very often is many people volunteering, like that I know, I guess from social media or just from colleagues of mine in my generation saying, "Hey, I want to be one of those 30,000 for Moderna and go and do that." I don't see many people who are volunteering to be guinea pigs. Of course, they are out there because obviously they're getting all these volunteers they need for Moderna in general. They need about 30,000 before September to get through this phase. So there are people out there, but I don't see a general consensus of, oh, this vaccine is going to be great. We're all going to go in together and we're all going to get vaccinated and the world is going to change. I think there's a lot of skepticism with how this is being handled, even though it's been rushed very quickly, especially with Russia and how they are rushing it. But
we're talking with Ariel
there.
Hickson. Ariel Hickson, one more question, and then I'm going to let you go. And I'm losing my signal a little bit, so I've got to reset my Wi-Fi in just a moment before the whole thing freaks out on this end. That shows what sort of technological expert I am not. Ariel, what are you looking for? We got 70 days until the election. Put on your politics analyst hat. Do you see anything over the next, 10 weeks that it could either be a game changer or something that you think could be really significant in pushing the race one way or the other?
You know what? I think compared to 4 years ago, what we do know is anything can happen. So I think even looking at polls right now with Joe in the lead, I don't necessarily think that people who are believing in Joe right now should be running around like, okay, that's it, we'll be all set. I think everyone has to be open to just seeing how shifts can change, how information can change. COVID-19, everything is up for grabs. Everything is in the air right now. And we're at a pivotal moment in history where it's nothing we've ever seen before. So I think it would depend. I think if President Trump dramatically changes his stance on certain issues, I'd be curious as to how that would affect voters. I think if Joe Biden becomes more outspoken, and especially with Kamala Harris by his side, how that will affect voters. I'm very, very curious about the debates. I think those will be very interesting to watch. I don't know if it will necessarily change voters' minds, but I think it will be something that everyone will be tuning into. Just given the people who are going against each other, I mean, it's good TV at the end of the day.
Well, everybody can tune in to Ariel Hickson anytime by going to Quick Hits News. You can get Ariel's videos, at least her contributions to the show, delivered to your inbox every day. And by the way, subscribing is free. We're going to join Michael Schur in just a moment. And I think what I'm going to try to do is I'm actually going to try to do it on this particular live cast, although that may be trouble because my Wi-Fi is a little bit off. But Ariel, you were great as always. Tell everybody where they can find you on it's at Ariel Hickson on Twitter.
Yes, at Ariel Hickson, first name, last name on Twitter. I am there. Also Instagram, all the above. I'm everywhere, but at Ariel Hickson is where you can find
me. We're so proud of Ariel Hickson. What a terrific reporter, an expert on all things millennial, pop culture, politics, and so much more. Ariel, thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it. We'll see you soon.
Oh, of course. Always fun with you, David. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, now I'm going to try something strange here. I'm going to hang up on Ariel. And remove her as a guest. This is part of the technology here. Now I'm going to try to bring in Michael Schur. A couple of buttons here, and we'll see how this goes. Fascinating conversation. Ariel's so good. I mean, so good. And it certainly, look, as a journalist who's been around for a while, it gives me a lot of confidence and a lot of hope in the future of journalism when there are people like Ariel Hickson who are out there doing their reporting and the way they approach things. It's just responsibly and compelling and credible and trustworthy. I mean, she's got it all, and so it's really terrific to see younger journalists like that, and we're very lucky to have her on Quick Hits News. So I'm now sent the invite to Michael Schur, waiting for him to join. Shu, we are actually live. There's no pre-live on this one because I just did a hot switch from Ariel Hickson right to you.
Look at that.
Back to Los Angeles.
Look at that. Yeah. Good to be here.
So, Michael Schur, you were on the East Coast for some family business. You're now back in LA. Let me just pick up right there. What was your trip like, given COVID and flying and all that sort of thing? Did you see anything unusual? Did you feel safe, unsafe?
I mean,
how did it go?
Empty airports, empty arrivals, empty seats. Everything was exactly how you would want it to be when you fly every day of your life. But when you know the underlying causes, obviously not worth the trade-off. But it's an unusual thing to be able to travel with such ease in America.
And did everybody wear masks? Flight attendants, the crew, the whole thing?
Everybody's required to wear masks. Some people, there are different extremes. There's the below the nose crowd, and then there are the people that are wearing, hazmat suits. So you see everything along that spectrum.
Wow. Shu, we were talking for the last 20, 25 minutes or so with Ariel Hickson about what happened in Wisconsin, where 29-year-old Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back in broad daylight in front of his 3 kids. The police say that the video clip doesn't tell the entire story. There were some assertions that perhaps he had a knife, although no evidence, no indication that a knife was found on the scene. A lot of people calling for investigations of the Wisconsin police. The Wisconsin governor's called up the National Guard to try to keep the peace. How does this play in terms of our political discourse that we have yet another police shooting of what appears to be an unarmed African-American man?
Well, I mean, it proves that George Floyd was not an aberration. It also proves that, yes, there are 2 sides to a police shooting, and any shooting, generally speaking. But we also know which side prevails more often than not. And in this case here, at the very least, and I am not a police officer, nor am I skilled in analyzing these things other than as a layperson, but it seemed like excessive force to me at the very least. And that in and of itself, at a time when you would expect police departments, police officers to actually be clued into a little more sensitivity on this issue. Wisconsin, a neighboring state to Minnesota, doesn't have to be. We're all neighboring states to Minnesota when it came to George Floyd. But, this should be further in the psyche that this sort of shooting that we saw on tape there, that grisly shooting, should have been avoided in some way. And that's when people talk about defunding the police, a lot of them are talking about defunding the mentality that goes into how we police, not taking money away from departments. And I think you saw that on display in Wisconsin.
The politics of this, and we have to talk about politics because we're 70 some days until the election. There were even Black Lives Matter activists who were condemning the rioting and the looting that happened last night. A number of Republicans have said, yes, there must be an investigation into police, but it is absolutely unacceptable for people to engage in violence. Is there a way that this cuts politically? And again, especially in a state like Wisconsin, which of course is one of these key battleground states.
Yeah, I mean, look, George Floyd brought people together across political barriers, and yeah, I think that everyone found something that was distasteful in what happened after George Floyd. None of it more distasteful than what happened to George Floyd. So I think politically, you're going to have the same people that are saying we need to change the way we police in this country, saying it with even greater vigor. But I also think that if these protests that happen remain peaceful, then that does the best good for those who are trying to make change. And if they don't, then of course, with 70 days, 69 days to go before an election, you have right in front of you the opportunity for Republicans to say that there is rampant, unchecked crime in this country. And the way we react to these things is to trash the police. They get a lot of mileage out of protecting the police, as the police do out of protecting themselves.
And that gets into the Republican convention, because I believe it was last night, there was that couple from St. Louis who were famously sort of videotaped waving guns. One guy looked like he had an assault rifle. The other one had a pistol, his wife, and they were dressed in very nice clothes. casual,
Yeah.
nice clothes on their yard, waving their guns at a group of Black Lives Matters protesters who were going through the neighborhood. They were actually featured at the Republican convention to sort of hammer home this point that, yes, Democrats want your neighborhoods to be safe and Democrats don't care about protecting your community. How do you think, is there much of an appeal in that sense? I mean, or is it the Republican base? Does that work with them, and how
Well, I mean,
does that message do with moderates?
They clearly have a blueprint here, which is they're coming for your suburbs. And the McCloskeys, that couple, are the poster children of protecting the suburbs. It is an us and them approach to politics, which, look, politics has always been about us and them. But the Trump administration has made capitalized the you and us and lowercase the T and them. And I think that's a problem in American politics right now. So I think I think this cuts well for Republicans who would like that plan, but I don't think that's a great number of people. Look, Donald Trump won the presidency by outdoing Hillary Clinton in the suburbs, right? And I think when you looked at the 2018 elections, the midterm elections, you saw that a lot of that gain, some of it was completely eradicated, and a lot of it was minimized. And now it seems that that's where the Democrats are going to make their stand, and that's where the Biden-Harris ticket can do well. And Trump is trying to hold on to that with the politics of fear. And I'm not saying that he's the first person to do that, right? I mean, it's been done very well before in the past, but this is a politics of fear that really cuts into race and cuts into old norms that are not really what people are comfortable with now.
Yeah, I'll never forget early in my career, I worked at CNN on the assignment desk in Washington, and the anchor, Bernie Shaw, asked the famous question in 1988 of Mike Dukakis, and at the time Mike Dukakis was against the death penalty, and said, Bernie Shaw asked something along the lines of, Governor Dukakis, if your wife had been, raped and murdered, would you still be against the death penalty? And Dukakis gave such a cold answer that the Republicans were able to say, oh, the guy has no feelings, he's got no sort of emotions. But the Republicans were able to make that point and play on people's fears that, hey, don't you want to be a tough law and order candidate if you want to be president of the United States? And Shu, I know you've got countless anecdotes and stories of that as well. In fact, you were part of the Dukakis campaign once upon a time, right?
I was, yeah. I was his press secretary for Florida at that time on that campaign, and we did not cheer when we heard that when we were watching that live at a watch party outside of Miami. Look, that campaign, and each one is very different. George Bush, who came back from a big deficit after the Republican convention, riding a successful convention that galvanized the religious right behind him, because it was unclear. The religious right really came to fruition during the Reagan years as a real force, and there was fear that they were going to abandon Bush and just not be a participant in that election. There were people, Pat Robertson ran against him. I think that was that same year. It was. And there were fears that he wasn't going to get them, but he had a very successful convention, George Bush did in Houston, came out of that, and then went to, the rest of America with the politics of fear. There was the famous Willie Horton ad that Michael Dukakis, as governor of Massachusetts, was furloughing murderers, and that murderer came out, and there was recidivism. He actually committed. The things are campaign tactics. They work sometimes. They work for George H.W. Bush. I don't know that there's any kind of there's not a maligned part of the country right now in suburbia that is necessarily buying into this with Donald Trump the same way they did in 1988 when there was a crack epidemic. The cities were faltering. It was a different time, but still, I mean, it's still the same type of politics, and the Republicans are pretty good at it.
Shu, and by the way, we're talking with Michael Schur, one of our stars on Quick Hits News. You can see him every day talking about politics and other news from across the United States and around the world. We publish our show each day about 5 o'clock or so. Quick Hits News. You can find it on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course we're using Haps TV to do some of our live coverage and our live conversations like we are tonight. And Shu, one of our colleagues at Haps, Mark, says that he's been told by a Republican official that the shooting in Wisconsin has pushed Wisconsin back into the Republican column. And Mark wants to know if we agree. You first.
I mean, if I agree that if I were a Republican official in Wisconsin, I would say absolutely, because this is the kind of thing. It's an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
I'm not dismissing it as out of hand, right? Whenever there's an event in a state, and again, these are 50 state elections. Whenever there's an event in a state, you look at it politically with this little time left before the election. I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether or not this is the kind of, you would think that the sympathies would be there for Mr. Blake, not so much for the police there, but the behavior of protesters afterwards, seeing that kind of mayhem and chaos. The Democrats are trying to sell themselves as an antidote to chaos, and there continues to be chaos in places like Kenosha after these things happen. So to that extent, I think possibly. I think it's a close state anyway, so anything little can tip it. But I wouldn't jump to that conclusion right away till you know more about what happened.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know how it's going to cut, but I think perhaps a larger impact might be whether Joe Biden actually goes to the state with Kamala Harris and does something that Hillary Clinton didn't do 4 years ago and actually campaign there, and we'll see what sort of campaign they can run. Shu, we got to ask you, we're getting into the 10 o'clock hour of the convention. Melania Trump is going to speak tonight. There was this viral video a couple days ago of her refusing to hold the president's hand when they were walking down Air Force One. What does she need to do to sort of show that their marriage is, I don't know, sometimes my wife doesn't like to hold my hand if we're in an argument. What does Melania Trump need to do to both humanize Donald Trump and also help his campaign?
I mean, look, I think say that she loves him and then talk about his attributes as president. I don't think she can fool a lot of people into thinking that they have a sort of a Ron and Nancy type of marriage, because they don't. Yeah. And I don't think there are a lot of people waiting on with bated breath to hear what Melania Trump has to say. But other than to talk about how much Donald Trump cares about the country. And, it has some sort of, she would be the one person to be able to say there's a drop of empathy in the man, because this is, now a little bit about empathy, and that is something he has to defend himself against. So if she can, sort of testify to that, I guess that helps. You know me about how cynical I am about what these speeches mean, but I guess that's what you can get out of her for the night anyway.
I join you in the cynicism. I mean, the conventions like the theater, and man, you should have heard, if you haven't heard, Antonio Mora was just on fire. I know we like to make fun of our colleague Antonio in Quick Hits News, but he was just on fire about both conventions and the absurdities of the politics and the extreme positions of both sides, and the remarkable stuff. But and I think he's now the president of the Cynicism Club for Quick Hits News. But
that's fine. I'll join.
By the way, Michael Shore is literally, I mean, I would say he's the best political correspondent that our nation has in broadcasting or print. The guy is just terrific, and you can get him every day. Quick Hits News. You can also sometimes see him on Haps. Make sure you follow him on Twitter, because he's also a hockey fan and very witty in his sports anecdotes. So, Shu, thanks as always for doing this. Welcome back home to California. Anything else you want to say before I hang this up?
No, great to be on Haps. David Schuster is too kind to me. We all know that we tune into this because David Schuster is the master at air traffic control. So, Shu.
Well, if you go back about 15 minutes, you will see, Shu, you will see where I actually spilled water while I was drinking with Ariel, and it sort of dribbled down my shirt. Right. So I'm going to go back. That's
right. Well, you've always had the drinking problem, Shu. You've always had the drinking problem.
Exactly. Shu,